Thank you, Ambassador Egan. Welcome to your second interview with Hiiraan Online.
Thank you very much.
I just want to start by asking you, what is the purpose of your trip to Canada?
This is part of my outreach to the Canadian diaspora, and indeed the North American diaspora and the European diaspora. This is my first opportunity since I assumed this responsibility as the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Somalia. It is a timely visit because this is a time of opportunity and unprecedented challenge for Somalia. As a person who is, on behalf of the international community, leading the peace process, I want to seize this opportunity to push forward the peace process by first and foremost making it as inclusive as possible of all the major stakeholders. And I consider the diaspora as one of the key stakeholders. It is an opportunity where we have just witnessed the signing of the roadmap, and the implementation of the roadmap must be as inclusive as possible. And I believe the diaspora has a tremendous role to implement the roadmap in the coming 11 months. And that's why I'm here to explain the background to the roadmap, the content of the roadmap, and the prospects of the roadmap to end the transition and realize the peace process, which had stalled for over 6 months.
To you about the roadmap. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this roadmap entails? I'm sure you can sort of tell us all the details, but just sort of the major points of this roadmap, and how do we get from the situation that Somalia is in right now to a democratically elected government that is functioning and that is doing the work of the people?
The roadmap is a product of the Kampala Accord, which had two pillars. One was to resuscitate, to revitalize the peace process by reigniting communication dialogue between the key institutions, Parliament and the executive. The Accord succeeded in that one. The second part was, after this breakthrough in the political impasse, what do we need to do to move forward? We agreed that the Somali stakeholders must craft a roadmap, which they have done. And they have adopted it and signed in Mogadishu for the first time in many, many years to host such a conference. And the roadmap has 4 main clusters. The first one is related to continuing the process of extending the territorial security beyond Mogadishu and building the Somali army and security organs. The second is to have a constitution that will define afresh the political institutions which would create stability and continuity in the peace process beyond what we have in the transitional charter. In this, there are aspects related to reform of parliament and preparations for elections. The third cluster is to continue with the process of political inclusiveness, outreach, and reconciliation. Not only of the political players who have remained outside the peace process since Djibouti, but also of the key social groups in Somalia who have remained outside, such as the diaspora, elders, religious leaders, women, the youth, and business community. They may not necessarily be political actors, but they are crucial social actors who have to be part and parcel in implementing the roadmap. The fourth is governance. To help this government have the basic institutions. Instead of having ministers without ministries, have core working ministries. Have a government that can begin to deliver services and show the difference between under the Shabab and being under a new government. Governance that will also make the government accountable, transparent, and responsible in managing revenues and giving confidence to the people. All this we hope to accomplish in 1 year. It is a different undertaking than any other before because, first of all, it is supported by the great majority of the stakeholders. And my visit here, as I said, is to bring the diaspora in this process. It is different in that this time we have timetable, we have benchmarks, and we have compliance mechanisms that have to be observed and supervised by the Somalis themselves, the regional actors, and the international community. So we hope, unlike before, this undertaking this time stands a better chance of being implemented, although the time is short, but I believe the commitment is high, and that is where my hope is.
You mentioned that the Kampala Accord, this roadmap is part of that Kampala Accord, and the Kampala Accord has proven to be incredibly unpopular with Somalis both in Somalia and abroad because it included, or the byproduct of it was the sacking of the former prime minister, which also the reaction to that was incredibly. It was visceral, really. I mean, there were demonstrations in various places, sometimes even violent demonstrations. Why do you think that reaction was so visceral among Somalis?
I think it was because people didn't have the time to understand what the Kampala Accord is all about. In previous agreements, the Bagati Agreement took 2.5 years to sign. So there was time for people to understand. The Djibouti Agreement took about 3 months. So there was time to understand. The Kampala Accord took 5 days. So there wasn't really time to explain to the people. And it came like a sudden development. And people didn't understand. But it ushered in 2 very big processes. It addressed a stalemate that had been existing for 6 months. And that stalemate was leading to a deeper political crisis in Mogadishu. The government of the day and the parliament of the day were not able to resolve that political crisis. There may have been some managerial successes in the day-to-day running of the government, but without a political framework, there was total paralysis that was leading to a deeper crisis. Either the government was going to be sacked, or parliament was going to be sacked, or 2 governments were going to exist side by side, and the time for ending the transition in July was approaching. So one of the medicines to address that, a government that had failed to address the political crisis, it may have managed the managerial part of it. But in a situation like that, you need a judicious combination of managerial skills and political acumen. The political acumen part was lacking. It took very intense persuasion to the two leaders to agree to break the political impasse. And in the agreement which they entered, one was to have another government that would facilitate dialogue and communication between the institutions, which is happening now, and happening in a very healthy atmosphere. But for 6 months, there was nothing. And that's why this had to be explained. But this Kampala Accord not only broke the impasse, dangerous impasse, but it also has brought a roadmap. These are the positive aspects of this. I'm not blaming the people because they had to be explained. It came very suddenly, and it should have been explained. It's now gradually being understood why this was important. We averted a major crisis that could have brought us back to the days of warlordism and intense fighting if that political impasse had not been addressed. In a way, the two leaders, by agreeing, they demonstrated, I think, great statesmanship. And now there is an opportunity to have a process that will be more inclusive and more representative.
Just a quick follow-up question about, you mentioned that there was a political acumen missing. Do you mean in particularly in the Prime Minister, or do you mean just in general?
Well, certainly it is the sum total of both sides, and in any situation there are leaders. I mean, you may have the best leaders, and sometimes when there are shortcomings, somebody has got to take responsibility, and you cannot single out one individual. But it was a situation where a crisis has to be addressed, and the consequence of addressing a crisis could become others taking responsibility or stepping down. For the sake of reactivating the peace process, it was understood. To me, I think those decisions, especially by the Prime Minister resigning, was very magnanimous. It was a very mature decision. It was in the sake of averting a deeper crisis that would have plunged Somalia back to the dark days of internecine warfare, worse than what we are witnessing now with the insurgents, that the Prime Minister stood up in magnanimity and said he was stepping down to give way to a new dispensation, which we are witnessing. The new dispensation has really broken the political impasse. There's a new government, a new Prime Minister, approved by Parliament, and there's a healthy atmosphere. The roadmap has been signed by all the stakeholders, not only Parliament and the executive, but the regions as well. And this is a new atmosphere completely. We have emerged stronger. We have emerged more far-sighted. And the cloud has been lifted, and we are going in a new direction. But in the process, there had to be change in order to see positive forward movement instead of a stalemate that was getting deeper into an abyss, so to speak.
But some would argue that, of course, the fact that it happened so quickly had something to do with a negative reaction to it, but some would also argue that it also it had the taint of sort of backroom dealings and all these sort of negative political connotations to it. And another reason is that a lot of people thought that Somalia at last had a well-qualified, well-functioning cabinet, and the sacking of the cabinet also added to that sense of, finally we had something good and now it's no longer the case. Why do you think, in particular, the sacking of the cabinet, what was the rationale behind that?
I don't think it was really the sacking. It was just to give way to a new process. In fact, I'm so impressed that Somalis are so resourceful. because one cabinet has given way to another cabinet, and the credentials of the new cabinet are impeccable. Not only impeccable, but they also have the political blessing of all the stakeholders. Maybe I should congratulate you, the Canadians. You have more cabinet ministers than before as Canadians. Yes. But certainly it has, again, demonstrated the significance of the diaspora in the affairs of Somalia. And what is encouraging me is that every stage is a learning process. What I've witnessed this afternoon is the tremendous interest in the Somalis in the diaspora who are ready to combine their technocratic competences with the political awareness. And I think in coming days, as more of you are invited to participate in governing, in running the government and other institutions, it is important to be technocratically competent, but also to be politically aware. You cannot be apolitical, however impeccably qualified you are. And this is the challenge of a country that has gone through for 20 years. Don't forget, the majority of the Somalis are in that country. And they have gone through the rough and tumble of the politics in there. And you have to be part of them. You cannot leave them. And this really demands a lot of political bargaining skills so that you are part of them. No other group is alienated. You may bring the technocratic skills, they bring the political experience, and the challenge of Somali politics is precisely to blend technocracy and the politics. And that is where I think the future will go. I'm very encouraged that now this combination seems to be bearing fruit. And the signing of the agreement and the participation of all the stakeholders, there are so many players who really need to be handled differently and in different combination. There are so many interests that need to be managed and reconciled. There are so many deep-rooted undercurrents that have to be understood and combined to create something positive. And this is what we seek to maintain in order to get stability and overcome the transition. You cannot blame anybody, but sometimes events move faster than we can see and manage. And this is exactly what happened. But this present government seems to be getting the knack, and they are doing very well. They need to be supported. They have the competence. They are looking at all the stakeholders and doing the balancing act, which is not easy, but some positive progress is being recorded.
Right. There are some people who say that your trip is part of a sort of a PR sort of move to convince the Somali diaspora that the Kampala Accord is actually a good thing. Is there any part of a communication strategy part of it, or is it just really communicating to the Somali diaspora?
Well, I have, on my part, as the special representative, being a great advocate of involving all stakeholders. I've had similar meetings with elders. I've had similar meetings with women groups. I'm going to have similar meetings with the business community. I've been meeting with the civil society representatives. I didn't have a chance to meet with the diaspora. So this is to convey a message that the diaspora has to be part of this process. In doing so, certainly I have to explain where we are. We are in a stage of implementing the Kampala Accord. I need to explain for those who didn't understand or who had misunderstood the Kampala Accord. because it happened so fast. My primary responsibility now is to include the diaspora in the implementation of the roadmap, to include the diaspora in the future governance of the country, especially in the reconstruction. I've discussed with the Canadian government, I've discussed with the American government, I'll be discussing with the Scandinavian governments to see the extent to which they can support the diaspora to come back, not only to implement the roadmap, but and beyond. So it is a much broader mission that goes beyond PR. It is a mission that is for the building of the peace process and for the reconstruction of Somalia. It's just the beginning. I'll make more trips so long as I am there, because this is just the first of a series of others, and I hope it will be reciprocated on a continuous basis rather than a one-time event. It has to be an undertaking with the support of all of us concerned.
Many Somalis are not at all confident that there will be elections anytime soon. The fear is that, come next August, there's going to be a repeat of, Kampala Accord 2011. What would you tell to the people who aren't confident about this process? What would you tell them to allay their fears?
I've spoken of compliance mechanisms. The biggest compliance mechanism is also the biggest asset that we have in this process. It is the Somali people. I see a consummation of partnership between the current leadership and the Somali people. I'm inviting the Somali people to be the custodians of this roadmap and to be the ones to blow the whistle when compliance is not being implemented or realized. We are asking the region and the international community also to provide political encouragement to the leaders. And that's why we are optimistic that the timetable has to be followed. The current leadership knows it has a responsibility. Before, it was a signature of one or two institutions. This time, it's an inclusive signatures. And if there is success, that success is what the Somali people can give us. If the Somali people do not want to see success, there won't be success. But if now the mindset and the commitment is for success, as my reading is that there is new attitude, I think there'll be success. It's all contingent upon the Somali people saying, transition, enough is enough. Change must come. And stand by that to ensure that change comes. It's not no time for complacency. The status quo is not an option. And you have all demonstrated your willingness to see change. And I think this message is understood. I deliberately encouraged the government and the speaker to attend the last Security Council meeting in order to get this message that the time for political bickering is gone. We are not going back to political bickering. And this message came from the Security Council. The time for implementing the roadmap is now. And this was the message from the Security Council. No more extensions. This was the message from the Security Council. The Speaker heard about it. The Prime Minister on behalf of the government. We were expecting the President also to come, but this was the wish of the Security Council, that they want the two leaders to hear this message. No bickering, no extension. We want the roadmap to implement. And this message will be repeated on the 23rd of December, where 22 heads of states from the region and from the international community are going to meet in New York to convey the same message. And this is the determination of the world to keep Somalia on the agenda, but not only to keep it for the sake of keeping it, to keep Somalia on the agenda in order to bring about change after these 11 months. So I hope there'll be a difference. But our biggest bet are the Somali people. And I would say among the Somali people, among the key players is the diaspora. Should I say the Canadian diaspora or the Toronto diaspora? Yes, and it can be done. Thank you.
But I think the famine has really given a lot of people the impetus to actually get on with the work at hand and not sort of dilly-dally anymore.
You know, this is the irony of it all. There is suffering. There is death. In the 21st century, people are dying of famine. People can die of bullets. People can die of diseases. But to die of famine in the midst of plenty is a disgrace the world shouldn't face. We know there is drought, which is a natural phenomenon. But not only Somalia has been hit by drought. Other countries have been hit by drought. But it's only in Somalia that drought has led to famine and people are dying because there is no government that can reach out and take policies and programs and action to address and mitigate the effects of drought. And all the Somalis now have come to awakening that we need a government that can plan. We need peace. We need stability in order to save the Somali people. So in a way, in the middle of this suffering, there is this awakening. Let me call it a rude awakening, that we need peace to avert this in now and in the near future. So the yearning and the need for peace and government has been much more reinforced now with this famine than ever before. And that's why I believe it is the Somali people and their calling and urging for peace and stability that they'll be the biggest custodians of the peace process. And they would hold to account the current leadership that it is to provide space for this peace process to move forward. No more bickering, no more postponement, but give the roadmap a chance to bring peace and stability.
It has been reported that the United Nations spends something like $800 million in Somalia. And many Somalis look at Somalia right now and they wonder, where is all that money going to? Can you tell us maybe one or two major projects that have been successfully implemented and completed in Somalia that would make people think, okay, maybe there is something that we're getting for this money?
In the current crisis, lives are being saved because of the assistance that is coming. But is the problem of access and security, especially in Shabaab-controlled areas, that this is not happening? But even before that, the resources that are coming for Somalia should not be measured by the amount of money that is given to the government. The government will say, we don't see that money, because they would want that money to go into the treasury of the government. But there are many other ways of implementing these programs. Half of the United Nations staff, contrary to what is said, 800 UN employees are Somalis, and they are in Somalia. They are undertaking vaccinations. They're undertaking therapeutic feeding. They are helping educational projects. They are providing seeds. And there is a significant presence in every one of those UN agencies. And the idea of shifting international staff into Somalia is a very valid point, because keeping them outside and spending money on them is denying the opportunity of more employment. And this is the marching orders we have also received from the Security Council, that two major constraints that have slowed down the deployment of the UN has been security. But security now is improving in Mogadishu. In Puntland and Somaliland, the United Nations is operating significantly. The other limitation has been accommodation. For those people who have been to Mogadishu, every single building has been, if not destroyed, has been badly damaged by the war over the past 20 years. There is no accommodation for office space and living quarters. And this is the biggest and priority area that we are investing, so that we can have space that is secure. Even after the Shabab pulled out, 2 weeks ago, a Land Cruiser laden with explosives was parked in a building that houses UN staff. Thanks to AMISOM and the mine action, it was diffused. So we try to get a place where people can live, but security also needs to be taken care of. In Mogadishu, we do not yet have a green zone, which they have in Baghdad or in Kabul. I just came to the Security Council. I requested for additional troops, 300, to guard the increased number of UN personnel that is going to be deployed in Mogadishu. The numbers are going to increase. We need accommodation, but we also need security. The Security Council has agreed to give me 300 more troops in order to increase our presence. That's why I'm saying confidently that between now and the end of the year, we shall increase our numbers, especially in Mogadishu, because we are going to have 300 totally dedicated to escorts and security of the staff. Instead of taking away the troops from the front line, this will be dedicated to safeguard the premises and the offices and the escorts. And therefore, our numbers are going to increase, I can assure you.
The future of Somali security will depend on well-trained, well-taken care of military. Can you tell us what the military condition is right now in terms of preparedness and training and et cetera, and morale? And
when the Somali army collapsed, which was the biggest in Africa after South Africa, and the warlords and the militias reigned, we had to begin from zero to build an army for the TFT. And that is just 3 years ago, to build afresh the security sector of the TFT. Unfortunately, as we train the soldiers, straight from the training schools, whether it's in Bihanga, Uganda, or other neighboring countries, they are directly taken to the front line. We haven't had time to train the command and control structure. Today, there are 10,000 TFG soldiers, but they are mostly riflemen and women. Not yet the command structure that we need in between. I've seen generals and brigadiers from the Siad Barre army in Mogadishu, but they are old people, very experienced. but you need the middle core command, and that is still missing. But these riflemen have done a wonderful job. They were in the forefront in fighting the Shabab, and we continue to build the army. There is another 1,000 that is completing training and should join very soon. But the next step would be to boost their morale, to get them good payment and regular payment, and to begin training the officer corps. Several countries, including my country, Tanzania, has offered to train non-commissioned officers and commissioned officers in Tanzania or in Somalia. We are ready to do that. And the makings of a Somali army are very much there. But it is a unique army. Most armies would train their soldiers, then they give them time before they go to war. They can even stay for 10 years. But the Somali army today, one day they are completing training, they graduate, the following day they're in the front line fighting. I think this is going to make one of the best armies again in Africa as before. We only have to give incentives for discipline and to give them command. AMISOM is mentoring. AMISOM is fighting with them side by side. But AMISOM has to leave. The mandate is renewable every year. They are not there to stay. And when the Somali army is ready, the police is over 3,000. They are being trained with the help of friendly countries like Japan and others like the Italians. The other security organs. The next thing, we have to train the justice and the corrections sections, that is prisons and the justice. That is the security sector. It is one of the priorities in the roadmap that building the Somali security sector has to continue. And I'm very optimistic it's going to continue. I have said, but this must be a national army. Recruitment must come from all regions, from all sections, from all clans. It shouldn't be sectarian or clan-based. And I think this is very important, that we have a national army and a national ethic that will instill these young people who are ready to give their lives, as they have demonstrated in the recent fights in Mogadishu.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for taking the time to talk to Hiiraan Online. I really appreciate it.